The report details the number of times CPS was called about this family. It goes back to 2015.
8-year-old Kendrick Lee is a sweet-natured boy who loves cartoons and needs a little extra help at his Houston school. But in the spring of 2020, he simply stops showing up. No one calls, no one checks. For an entire year, one critical question remains. How does a little boy full of hope disappear from sight without a single person raising the alarm? On October 24, 2021, deputies from the Harris County Sheriff's Office were sent to a modest apartment building after receiving a call for help. The caller was a teenager who explained that he and his brothers had been on their own for months. No adults were present. There was little food, and conditions inside the home had grown increasingly unsafe. What he revealed next was even more alarming. One of his siblings had tragically passed away, and he was still inside the apartment with them. The officers climbed the stairs to Unit 1313, expecting to find signs of concern. But what they encountered carried a weight far beyond that. The apartment was dark, without electricity, and carried the unmistakable feel of a place left unattended. Everyday comforts, furniture, working appliances, even simple order were missing. The air inside was heavy, reflecting a space where children had to cope without the guidance or presence of a caregiver. In the center of the living room stood 3 young boys. The oldest, just 15, had been the one to make the call. His 2 younger brothers, ages 10 and 7, stayed close to him, quiet and wary. Their appearance showed visible signs of hardship, clothing that no longer fit, unwashed hair, and the thin look of children who had gone without consistent care. Despite their exhaustion, they had endured together, relying on each other in the absence of adult support. When asked about the sibling he mentioned, the teenager led deputies to a back room. There, they discovered the difficult truth. His younger brother, Kendrick Lee, only 8 years old, had left them many months earlier. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers. Your support through likes, shares, and comments means the world to me. Your engagement helps make these stories even more meaningful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts. Kendrick was remembered as a child filled with energy, curiosity, and the innocence of youth. His loss was not just a sorrow for his family, but a reminder of the protections every child deserves and the profound effect when those safeguards are not in place. What surprised officials was not only that Kendrick was no longer with them, but that his brothers had continued in the apartment all that time, surrounded by challenges no child should ever face. They managed with remarkable resourcefulness, finding food when possible, sharing what little they could, and showing a strength that few could imagine. Yet behind their quiet courage was the deep sorrow of children who lacked consistent safety or guidance. Outside the apartment, word spread quickly and neighbors began to gather. Some stood silently, trying to take in what they were hearing, while others whispered to one another, admitting what had lingered in the back of their minds for a long time. "We thought something wasn't right," one neighbor confessed. They remembered the children always looking unkempt, often seen on their own. A few had noticed strange sounds through the walls. Others recalled seeing the eldest wandering the complex late at night, appearing hungry. There had even been an unpleasant odor that some noticed, but no one ever reported it. Maybe it was fear, maybe hesitation, or maybe the hope that someone else would step forward, but no one did. And because no one spoke, Kendrick's life was cut short, and his siblings carried on in silence for nearly a year, with that loss in the shadows of their home. Sheriff Ed Gonzalez later described what investigators found when they entered the apartment. The floors were bare and soiled, there was no furniture and no bedding for the children. Insects had spread throughout the unit, and one of the boys showed visible concerns that urgently needed medical attention, concerns that had been overlooked for far too long. Authorities later explained that the children were also carrying other personal challenges, which made their survival all the more heartbreaking and their strength all the more extraordinary. As for why the teenager delayed reaching out for help, investigators could only speculate. But before Kendrick's name became the focus of headlines and court documents, he was simply a little boy who loved cartoons, laughed at funny faces, and clung to his brothers when he felt uncertain. He was gentle, playful, and careful in his own way. His teachers once described him as a child who needed patience and a steady hand, but who had a big heart and a warm spirit. In the spring of 2020, he was attending classes in the Aldine Independent School District in Houston. There, he was known, cared for, and supported. Staff gave him encouragement, guided him through routines, and celebrated his progress.
But then, without warning, his seat in the classroom was empty. There was no formal withdrawal, no inquiry, and no follow-up. He simply disappeared from the school rolls, and no outside system came to check on him. Life in the wider world moved forward, but Kendrick had slipped from view. Inside his apartment, however, the weight of his absence grew heavier. His brothers rarely spoke of him after he was gone, not because they forgot, but because they had learned to remain quiet. Over time, they had come to believe that speaking up only made life harder, so they carried on in silence, pretending things were normal, even when nothing was. This leads to the question many have asked: who was their mother? And how had things reached this point? Gloria Williams, the woman later at the center of one of Texas's most heartbreaking child welfare cases, began her life in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Her early years were filled with instability. She left school before graduating and became a mother while still very young. Over the years, she had 6 children, each with a different father. Relationships came and went quickly, leaving disruption and little stability behind. One of those men was Kendrick Lee, Kendrick's father. He and Gloria were never married, and their relationship was strained from the beginning. After Kendrick's birth, Courtney moved back to Louisiana, creating distance. In 2016, he tried to reconnect and became more consistent in his son's life, seeing Kendrick and his siblings on weekends and hoping they would be part of his wedding to a new partner. But Gloria closed that door firmly. She blocked him on social media, refused to share her address, and cut off communication completely. That decision didn't just keep Courtney away, it kept the children isolated from yet another potential source of safety and support. There had once been someone who tried to bring stability into Gloria Williams' household. His name was Daryl Wayne Towner. Though not related by blood, he stepped into the children's lives as if they were his own. Gloria met him in 2017 at a Houston shelter, and later that year, they married. Family members described Daryl as patient, devoted, and genuinely invested in the children's well-being, particularly Kendrick's. For a short while, the family experienced a sense of steadiness under his care. That comfort ended in 2019 when Daryl passed away unexpectedly at the age of 57, leaving behind a void that was never filled again. After his loss, Gloria's life became even more unsettled. She rarely stayed in one place, moving frequently from one apartment to another, from one relationship to the next. Each shift left the children without roots or consistency. By the time Kendrick was born in 2012, Gloria had already lost custody of some of her older children. Her daughters were separated from their brothers early, each placed with different relatives. One lived with an aunt in Houston, where she experienced more stability. Another daughter, who was a teenager at the time, was also cared for outside Gloria's home and had little contact with her mother or her brothers by 2021. Gloria made these arrangements informally, without court involvement, leaving no official records. Those choices seemed less about safeguarding her children and more about convenience. Fewer responsibilities, fewer questions. Yet she continued receiving assistance linked to the children who remained under her care. Concerns about Gloria's parenting went back years. Records from Texas CPS reveal a long history of reports dating as far back as 2007. The notes highlighted unstable living conditions, frequent moves, and difficulties complying with check-ins. There were a total of 9 investigations over the years.
One case, from 2015, officials confirmed troubling discipline from a former partner that left visible concerns on the children. In 2020, another report documented that one of Gloria's teenage sons struggled deeply with his emotions and had an encounter with law enforcement that raised alarm. Despite these red flags, the children were never fully removed from her care. There were also accounts of substance use and observations from neighbors who described her as inconsistent, sometimes affectionate, other times distracted and distant. The situation was complicated by her pattern of relying heavily on relationships. Gloria found it challenging to manage on her own, and with each new partner, the family experienced more uncertainty. Disagreements, sudden moves, and school changes became a recurring cycle. When the pandemic began in 2020, she withdrew even further, stepping away from schools and community systems. On paper, she was still listed as a caregiver for 4 children. In reality, her household was increasingly alone. It was during this vulnerable period that another figure entered the children's lives, someone whose presence would dramatically alter their future. Brian Coulter appeared in Gloria's world in 2019, introduced through mutual acquaintances. At first, he seemed supportive. He was lighthearted in public, helped around the home, and even shared affectionate posts calling Gloria his queen. But beneath that surface, troubling signs were already present. He had a history marked by temper issues, untreated mental health concerns, and heavy drinking. By late 2020, he was showcasing himself online under the name FOE Productions, short for Family Over Everything. He posted about music ambitions, jewelry, and grand plans, often presenting himself as Gloria's husband, though no legal marriage ever took place. In one of his online videos, Brian could be seen speaking casually about his lifestyle and possessions, more focused on appearances and luxury than on responsibility. It was a striking contrast. While his social media projected confidence and excess, the reality inside Gloria's home told a far different story, one of unmet needs, instability, and children who longed for safety and consistency. By 2020, Brian had become a constant presence in the apartment. At first, he demanded respect from the children, but soon his presence shifted into something heavier, rooted in control and tension. Kendrick, who was especially gentle and needed extra patience because of developmental delays, often found himself facing the brunt of that pressure. Messages later uncovered between Brian and Gloria revealed concerning remarks that showed the household was not safe. Yet on social media, Brian created a very different version of himself. He posted videos laughing, drinking, and boasting about material possessions, portraying an image of carefree living, while the children struggled quietly just beyond the frame. Investigators would later note the contrast between what the couple shared online and what was happening inside their home. In one video, Brian smiled for the camera while holding a drink, speaking casually about his lifestyle. In reality, the children were going without proper meals. Just a few feet away, their world was far different from the polished picture he presented. Conversations exchanged between Gloria and Brian showed their awareness of the children's hardships, yet neither sought meaningful help. In one especially heartbreaking exchange, Gloria described Kendrick's visible distress, and Brian dismissed it with cold indifference. Then came Thanksgiving Day in 2020, a holiday meant for family and warmth. For once, the kitchen held real food. Gloria's benefits had just been reloaded, and the table was full. Kendrick's face lit up with joy, his eyes wide, as he reached for food he had long craved. For a moment, he looked like any child should, happy, carefree, savoring a meal without worry. But the peace was short-lived. That day ended not in celebration, but in profound sorrow. Kendrick's life ended, and the home fell into an even deeper silence. In the days that followed, Gloria told the children to stay out of Kendrick's room. She placed a blanket over him and explained he needed rest. The younger brothers, though still children themselves, quickly understood what had happened, but kept quiet out of fear. Gloria never contacted emergency services, never reached out for medical help. Instead, she closed off that room and carried on as though nothing had changed. Online, Brian continued posting smiling photos, ignoring the reality of what the children were enduring.
By early 2021, Gloria and Brian had stopped living in the apartment full-time. They moved into another unit nearby, leaving the 3 boys ages 15, 10, and 7 behind. At first, Gloria would return occasionally with snacks or fast food, but as the months went on, her visits became rare. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The boys were left to manage on their own in an apartment with no electricity, little food, and the constant presence of grief. The oldest, barely a teenager, tried to care for his younger brothers as best he could, rationing what little they had and doing his best to protect them. Neighbors began noticing signs that concerned them. A noticeable scent came from the unit, so much so that one resident scrubbed her porch thoroughly. Others filed complaints with management, but no official visits were made. A few kind-hearted neighbors stepped in quietly. One woman left pizza boxes and snacks at the door. Another neighbor allowed the teenager to charge his phone and gave him bottled water. Yet no one fully understood what was happening inside. By late October 2021, the oldest boy could no longer carry the burden alone. Desperate and exhausted, he called 911. His voice on the recording revealed both his fear and his strength. He explained that his brother had passed away nearly a year earlier and that his mother had been gone for months. The dispatcher, stunned, asked where their mother was. His answer was hauntingly simple. She left. Police responded immediately. When officers arrived, they were met with an overwhelming odor that confirmed the neighbors' long-standing concerns. Inside, they found 3 children, thin, tired, but still standing. And down the hall, behind a closed door, they discovered that Kendrick had tragically not survived. What they uncovered was not just the heartbreaking loss of an 8-year-old boy, but also the incredible resilience of a 15-year-old who had carried the weight of caring for his brothers for nearly a year, waiting for the day when someone would finally listen. For 2 days after the 911 call, investigators searched for Gloria Williams and Brian Coulter. They had left the apartment, but not the city. On October 26, 2021, security cameras at a Houston library showed them walking inside. Gloria appeared calm as she used a computer, reportedly reading news articles about the case. Deputies who had already been alerted were waiting outside. When the pair stepped into the parking lot, their time on the run came to an end. Later accounts from the children revealed difficult details about their time living with Brian. They described moments of unfair treatment that left a mark. One child recalled an incident that made it painful to eat for weeks afterward. While Brian shared videos online portraying a carefree life, the children were facing challenges that no child should ever experience. Once the case reached court, answers began to emerge. Brian Coulter, then 31, was taken into custody in late October 2021. Prosecutors requested a high bond, and the court agreed. Eventually, Brian waived his right to a jury trial and requested that a judge decide his case. In early 2024, after testimony from experts and surviving children, the judge issued the maximum penalty: life in prison without the possibility of release. Gloria Williams, Kendrick's mother, faced her own set of charges. Her bail was set high, broken down as $350,000 for of a dependent, $300,000 for tampering, and $250,000 for reckless endangerment, adding up to $900,000 in total. She remained in custody throughout the process. In November 2024, rather than go through a lengthy trial, Gloria chose to accept a plea agreement. She admitted responsibility and was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Prosecutors explained that this decision spared the surviving children from having to relive painful memories in open court. All 3 children were removed from the apartment the day deputies arrived and were placed under state care. Evaluations showed challenges, such as fear, worry, and developmental delays, but also signs of resilience and strength. For many who followed the case, the most difficult realization was that Kendrick had gone unnoticed for so long. The district attorney later said the case highlighted gaps within child protection and community systems. Kendrick's story now stands as a reminder that every child deserves to be seen, heard, and safeguarded, and that society must act sooner before opportunities are missed.
Amid the long legal process, a quieter and more tender chapter unfolded. On December 10, 2021, Kendrick Lee was finally given a place of rest. His funeral was held at a small church in Northeast Houston, where the service was simple but heartfelt. The sanctuary was filled not only with relatives, but also with strangers who felt compelled to come and honor a boy they had never met. Just days earlier, on October 30th, neighbors and community members had gathered outside the apartment complex where Kendrick had once lived. They carried candles, lifted prayers, and stood in silence together, determined to show that his life mattered. One of the voices at that vigil belonged to a local advocate who urged those present to stay united and to speak out whenever a child seems forgotten. "Sometimes," he said with tears in his eyes, "we are called to go beyond what feels easy." His words reminded everyone listening that children like Kendrick need adults who will not look away. Among the crowd was Hetty Carter, a family friend who had known Kendrick's grandmother for decades. She spoke gently about Kendrick's kind nature, remembering him as a child who smiled often and was easy to love. Her grief was evident as she explained how heartbreaking the past year had been, filled with questions no one could yet answer. Even in her sadness, she leaned on faith, saying prayers not only for Kendrick, but for everyone connected to the case. Neighbors, too, reflected on their memories. Many shared how they had been unsure of what was happening inside the apartment, uncertain if the family had moved away or if something was wrong. For some, the quiet around Kendrick's home became a silence they didn't know how to interpret. Looking back, they admitted that they wished they had pushed harder for answers. That regret weighed heavily as the truth slowly came to light. When Kendrick was finally laid to rest, the moment carried both heartbreak and hope. His resting place now stands as a lasting reminder that his short life mattered and that the lessons from his story should never be forgotten. For Houston and beyond, the question remains: how can a child live unseen in a community full of people? And how do we make sure no child is left invisible again? Now I want to ask you, what do you believe could help prevent tragedies like this in the future? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective matters. And if Kendrick's name should continue to be remembered, please support this channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Together, we keep these stories alive, not to dwell on sadness, but to build awareness, and hopefully to make sure no child is ever forgotten again.